Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome back to another lecture on the formation of equations, week 3. This is unit 3.2. We previously just did unit 3.1 and this is 3.2 where we'll be talking about the distance and the midpoint formula. Now before we try to understand uh, the distance and the midpoint, we need to understand what is the rectangular coordinate system. Obviously, you must also be wondering that what is the distance that we need to find and what is the midpoint that we need to find. Uh, we'll be first talking about the rectangular coordinate system. Now, in order to understand the midpoint and the distance formula, we need to first understand, we first need to understand the rectangular coordinate system. Rectangular coordinate system is based on a Cartesian plane. Now these may look like difficult names, coordinate system, Cartesian plane, but I'm pretty sure you're all already familiar with all this. What you see before you, students, this is, you may have called it a graph all your life, some people may have called it axis or whatever, but this is basically a Cartesian plane. Okay? And a Cartesian plane, a coordinate system based on Cartesian plane, this is called the rectangular coordinate system. Now, so we'll be talking about this. We'll be, every mathematical model, we need to have a visual model of whatever we are saying, and this Cartesian plane is used a lot of times. So we'll be trying to understand what all of this is. So first of all, the axis. This is the Cartesian plane, first of all, and it is made up of two straight lines. Okay, uh, you may have seen this line before. This is basically, if you want to think of it, this is basically a number line, a real number line. With this point is 0 in the middle, and this is 5, 10, whatever. So 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. So this is basically a number line. So it's, you can think of it as two number lines. One is horizontal and the other one is vertical, right? So the horizontal line is called the x-axis right here, right? And the vertical line, it is called the y-axis right here. Okay. uh, this point right here, the point where the two lines meet, this point is called, sorry, this point is called the origin. Okay, so what is the origin? Origin is basically where the two lines are meeting, and this point is basically, you can think of it as 0, right? So 0 1 2 3 4, this is 5 plus 5, right? If you want to go to the left, then 0 1 minus 1 minus 2 minus 3 minus 4 minus 5. Okay, so this is 5 and minus 5 on the x-axis. Similarly, 5 and minus 5 on the y-axis. When you go up, the values, they're positive, plus 1 2 3 4 5, and when you go down, it's negative, minus 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, so the values to the right of the origin, they're all positive. The values on the to the top of the origin, they're all positive. The values to the left and the values to the down to the below the origin, they're all negative, right? So this is what makes up a Cartesian plane. Next up, we'll talk about the ordered pair. Basically, this Cartesian plane or this graph paper is used to plot points, right? So for example, this point right here, roughly, right? So you can see how many units is it away from the origin on the x-axis. 1 2 3 4 5, right? I mean, you can think of it roughly as above 5. And how many units on the y-axis? 1 2 2 units, right? So this point right here, it has a location. You can think of it as a location from the origin, and this location is in the form of an ordered pair. What does it ordered pair mean? How many units in the x-axis and how many units in the y-axis, right? So 5 comma 2. An ordered pair is always written like this: x comma y, right? Like for example, uh, something like this. Now obviously it's not very accurate, but something like this, right? So this is, if you take 15 units up, right? I'll I'll try to draw a straight line over here. So you can see that it's coming at around 14 units over here, and on the y-axis it's coming at around roughly 10 units, right? So the coordinates, this is basically called the coordinates of this point. This is, let me call this point 1. So the coordinates of point 1 are 5, 2. Okay, and similarly, if this is point 2, then the coordinates of point 2 are how many of this? This is 14, right? We said this is 14, 10, right? So this is how you define the location of a point, or by using this coordinate system. This is why it's called the rectangular coordinate system. Okay. Similarly, something like this, maybe, you know, this point right here. On the x-axis, how many units away from the origin is it? It's 5 units, right? So 5 plus 5, and the x-axis it's 5, and in the y-axis, almost like minus 5, right? Minus 5. So you can write it 5 comma minus 5, right? X comma y. Always write the first number should be the x number, and the second number should be the y number, right? So 5 comma minus 5. So this is basically what an ordered pair is. And the next up, we need to understand what a quadrant is. Quadrant basically means if this is a circle, I'll tell you the proper definition of a quadrant. So this is a 90 degree, right? So 1/4 of a circle, this part is basically called a quadrant, right? Now in this graph, or this in this Cartesian plane, this whole thing, this part right here, this is the first quadrant, right? This part right here is the second quadrant, this is called the third, and this is called the fourth quadrant. Okay, in the first quadrant, my x is positive, right? And my y is positive as well. In the second quadrant, my x is negative and my y is positive. You know, like any like, for example, if I'm talking about point quadrant number 1, any point in quadrant 1 will always have, you know, in that ordered pair, the x and y values, they will always be positive. It will always be something like 7 comma 16. Again, very rough, so don't take my word for it. Similarly, in the second quadrant, all the values of x, they will be negative, and the values of y, they will be positive. Okay, so like, for example, some point like this, it's going to be minus 10 comma 5. Notice the x value is negative and the y value is positive, right? Then in the third quadrant, my x values are negative and my y values are negative as well. Okay, and the fourth quadrant, my x values are positive and my y values are negative, right? So these are just some of the ways in which we can better understand the graph or the Cartesian plane. But these are some of the characteristics, some of the properties you can think of it, right? So the Cartesian plane is made up of two axes, the x-axis and the y-axis. This is also sometimes called the negative x-axis and the negative y-axis, right? The part above is called the positive axis. The part right here in the middle, this is called the origin, and it is denoted by an O or a 0. It's denoted by an O. Okay, ordered pair, basically these are used to, you know, give the precise location of a point. For example, something like this. So what is the units in the x on the x-axis and in the y-axis? They will have some units like this, you know, something like 6 comma 7. This is what an ordered pair is. This is also called coordinates, you know, coordinates. The coordinates of point A, B, C, whatever. And we then discussed quadrants. So this is basically a general rundown of the whole Cartesian plane, right? So we need to understand this, and then we'll move on to the midpoints and the distance formula. So the midpoint formula, consider this line, right? So this is your y-axis, this is your x-axis, right? And I have 2 points right here, first point right here, and the second point right here. The first point has some coordinates x1 comma y1. Now again, I'm representing using x1 and y1. They can be some numbers, you know, they can be something like 2 comma 3, or I don't know, 4 comma 6, anything like this. We're using x comma y to represent that, you know, they can be any numbers. Okay, so we have 2 points and both of these points, I've joined both of these points with a straight line. Okay, so this is what has happened. Now what the midpoint formula does, I'm sure you must have realized by now, is it basically finds the midpoint. These 2 points, they're joined by a line, And the midpoint formula, it's a formula which when we use, we find the coordinates of this point. You know, this point right here, it is in the middle of this line, right? So we need to find out the midpoint of this line. So we'll use the midpoint formula. Consider this line. This is a line that is made by connecting 2 points. What if you want to know the midpoint of this line? In such case, we use the midpoint formula. What is the midpoint formula? The midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Remember, the midpoint formula will give me a point, right? The midpoint is basically a point, right? And every point has coordinates in the form of x comma y, right? It must have some number right here, something like maybe 1, then a comma, and then another number, right? So this is how you're supposed to denote midpoints. So remember, there will be some number over here, x1 plus x2 divided by 2. It will be some number, something maybe like, let's suppose 3.5. And y1 plus y2, this y1 plus this y2 divided by 2, it will give me another, again some other number, let's suppose 7. So 3.5 comma 7, this will be your midpoint. Let's take an example. So to find the midpoint of the line segment connecting minus 2 comma 6, we have a point called minus 2 comma 6, and we have a point 1 comma minus 9, and we are applying the midpoint formula here. Now the midpoint formula, the first step, in case you're weak and all this, the first step is to highlight what x1, y1 and x2, y2 is. So this thing right here, you can call it x1, right? This thing right here, you call it y1. Please make sure that you don't call this thing as x2, right? Because again, I'll repeat, we write ordered pairs in the form of x comma y, right? So this is x1 comma y1. So x1 will be minus 2, y1 will be 6. So similarly, this right here, I'll call this as x2, and this will be y2. Now simply put these values in the formula. My formula was x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So minus 2 plus 1 divided by 2, which is right here, right? And y1 plus y2 divided by 2, 6 plus minus 9 divided by 2. You have to make sure that the signs are used correctly, and the addition subtraction is done correctly as well. So when you do this correctly, you'll find out that this is the midpoint, minus half comma minus 3 by 2. Okay, so let's just see what it looks like on a graph. Minus 2 comma 6, the point minus 2 comma 6 is minus 2 and 6 units up. This is minus 2 comma 6 and 1 comma minus 9. So 1 unit to the right because it's positive 1. So 1 unit right, and minus 9, that means we need to go down by 9 units, and this is the second point. We join these two lines with a point, and the midpoint of this line is right here, which is minus half comma minus 3 by 2, the one that we just calculated. Okay, so basically there are two ways. You can either do it using this midpoint formula, or you can do it using the graph as well. But using the graph is a bit tricky and a lengthy process, so the formula is always better to use. And now the distance formula. So we found the midpoint, and now we're going to find out the distance. Given 2 points on a Cartesian plane, the distance separating the 2 points can be found by using the distance formula. Okay, so what we'll have in this case is basically we'll have some point 1 and another point, and we'll join these both lines join these both points with the line, and we'll try to calculate the distance or the length of this line, right? And we can do that using the distance formula. The distance between point, let me call this point A and B. The point A and B is denoted as BAB, can be calculated by this formula. The square root of x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square. Now remember, this is the distance. The distance is not the midpoint. The distance will be some number, okay? It will be 2 or something like 5, or it can be 120, whatever. Also remember, it cannot be negative. It will be some number, okay? It will not be a point. It will not be 2,3. No, the distance is a number. It will be something like 12, 13, whatever. It has to be a number. So please remember that, okay? So we'll take an example. Find the length of the line segment connecting points A and B. So this is point A and this is point B. So we need to find out the distance. So just like before, we'll first of all, we'll highlight what the x1, y1s are and the x2, y2 is. So I'll call this point as x1 and I'll call this point as y1. Then I'll call this point as x2 and I'll call this point as y2. And then I'll just substitute these values in this formula. The formula is x2 minus x1 whole square. X2 I've called it as 1 and x1 as minus 2. So 1 minus minus 2, again take care of the signs. Minus minus becomes positive. So 1 plus 2, it becomes 3 square. Then 1 minus 5 square, which becomes minus 4 square, which gives me square root of 25, and I get the distance 5. Notice this is a number. Again, I'll repeat the point. This is not a coordinate, right? So this is the distance formula and the midpoint formula, okay? So these are a couple of questions for your practice. You'll have to find out the midpoint of this line segment, and then you'll have to find out the length of a line segment, and you have been given the points. The answers have also been mentioned for your ease. Okay. Now you are recommended and you are encouraged to go ahead and check out all of these links. They're very useful links. They'll help you in clearing the concepts, and they'll help you in solving some of these questions of the distance formula and the midpoint formula, and also they'll give you a general understanding of the Cartesian plane and the rectangular coordinate system. So thank you. This was lecture 3.2. I will see you in the next lecture.